So I'll try to keep this short, shorten it a little bit because I know I'm standing between you and lunch. So a little bit about me. I'm a principal engineer at Broadcom. I'm also the vice chair of the CNCF Technical Oversight Committee. And like Ram said, I'm also chairing KubeCon India and I've chaired a few other events. I did a version of this talk at the keynote that Ram just mentioned. I've added a few more stuff towards the end. So yeah, let's get started. So I'm going to be talking about, so you've heard a lot about SBOMs, but what do we really do about it? So we've been in the holiday season for a while now, and most of you must have dealt with like pulling out that box of holiday lights every year, only to find that it's such a tangled horror of mystery knots, right? And guess what? That's your software supply chain. So securing your software supply chain has become so complicated right now. It's like playing a game of Jenga, but being blindfolded, right? So every time you pull out a block from that Jenga tower, you just don't know if it's all gonna come crashing down. And that's kind of where we stand right now with securing a software supply chain. So, and to solve all of these problems, we came up with this concept of SBOMs, and we've become remarkably efficient at producing them. I mean, think about it, right? It's a literal SBOM party out there. Every release, every artifact, every tar file comes with a nicely formatted bill of materials that tells you everything under the hood. And now, SBOMs are great, but we're kind of treating them like that fruit bowl we keep on the kitchen counter because it makes us feel healthy. But deep down, we know that we're just going to be ordering pizza for dinner, right? So we create these SBOMs, we take a victory lap, oh, we've created SBOMs, but then we just ignore them. So what do we do? Now let's take a step back. Let's talk about supply chains. So in every supply chain, you have producers as well as consumers. Producers create artifacts and consumers rely on them, right? So and with SBOMs, we're kind of in a similar spot. So we've got some producer friends like SPDX, Cyclone DX, in Toto, and a lot of work is going on in the OpenSSF as well. Each of these projects gives us a piece of the puzzle on how we manage our software dependencies. Again, producers, they provide the ingredients, and consumers, they need to know what's inside. But turns out it's not just as easy as reading a list. So, why? Because analyzing SBOMs can be pretty difficult, right? Like you've got so many, like the complex dependency trees, which can be hard to track everything down. So many formats out there, which can be very confusing. Let's not forget the volume of data that we have. And then there's this whole question of how far down the rabbit hole do we go and what metadata is really essential. And if we don't have automation, that can really slow us down when we're responding to vulnerabilities. And finally, let's not forget about outdated SBOMs, because if we don't keep everything current, this just makes everything much more worse. So, the issue is that we're sitting on this treasure trove of information, but we're not doing anything about it, right? It's like we're a chef. We have this whole pantry full of gourmet ingredients, but what we're doing is we're just microwaving the leftovers. So we have the tools to whip up something spectacular. So why not just do that? So how do we do this? Through GUAC, right? So GUAC is an OpenSSF project that provides you a graph-based data model that helps you store, query, analyze, and even visualize this data. It basically links all your artifacts in a graph, essentially turning your dependency tree into a dependency forest, where theoretically you can find the trees with termites before they bring the whole forest down. So what does GUAC help us do? So it helps you answer questions like, is one of my artifacts affected by an open source vulnerability? Are my artifacts SALSA compliant? And have they been compromised by a potentially bad actor in my organization? So now GUAC is awesome, but we're still getting started with it. So there's a lot that we can do to strengthen it, right? For instance, we can build a query library with some ready-made queries that can answer like some of the common security questions that we see. And once we have this, we are essentially getting a graph database of metadata that can help us answer crucial questions like, is my dependency leaking my data for the entire world to see? Now, to make sense of all of this, we need policies, right? just building seed wells is not enough. We need to enforce them. So we need to build automation using tools like Kyverno and OPA to set up these enforcements going forward. So we've talked a lot about GUAC, but with all of this knowledge, let us see how it fits into the bigger picture. So think of it like a layered cake, where each layer has a critical function and keeping the whole thing intact. So let's slice through it. So the first layer, we need to build a solid foundation of trust, right? So this is where you ask questions like, who is in my supply chain and what are they even doing? If you don't have this, then you're operating in the dark and just hoping that nothing malicious sneaks in, and that never ends well. Next up, we have claims. So this is where the identities that we just talked about make promises about what they're doing. For instance, your build system may say, hey, I built this in a very secure and reproducible way. And how do you capture these promises? Using SBOMs and a lot of other tools like Salsa Prevalence, VEX that we just saw, and a lot more. Next up, we have GUAC. So this is where it fits in. It turns all of the chaos into actionable insights, and you can kind of think of it as your brain of software supply chain. Finally, we have policy that we just talked. So this is the real world impact, and this is the top layer of the cake that everyone loves because it turns theory into practice, right? So where does all of this wonderful software supply chain, SBOMs, GUAC, all of this lead to? A lot of future opportunities. So we're in that era where SBOMs are not just sitting there gathering dust, right? They're actively sounding the alarm. Where automation and policy are using all of this SBOM goodness, and we are setting a new standard for how we handle the supply chain. And together, we're not just listing ingredients, we're building a buffet of transparency and trust, because come on, the best part of a buffet is not just looking at the food, it's digging in. So with that, I'll stop and let's dig into the actual food of people. Thank you.